In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
10 generations there were from Noah to Abraham, to show you how great is the clemency of God, for all the generations provoked his wrath, until Abraham, our father, came and received the reward of all of them. For the sake of Abraham, God showed himself long-suffering and patient during the lives of these 10 generations. Yea, more, the world itself had been created for the sake of his merits. His advent had been made manifest to his ancestor Riau, who uttered the following prophecy at the birth of his son Serug, quote, "From this child he shall be born in the 4th generation that shall set his dwelling over the highest, and he shall be called perfect and spotless, and shall be the father of nations, and his covenant shall not be dissolved, and his seed shall be multiplied forever." Unquote. It was indeed high time for the friend of God should make his appearance upon the earth. The descendants of Noah were sinking from depravity to lower and lower depths of depravity. They were beginning to quarrel and slay, eat blood, build fortified cities and walls and towers, and set one man over the whole nation as king, and wage wars, people against people and nations against nations, these cities against cities, and do all manner of evil, and acquire weapons, and teach warfare unto their children. And they began also to take captives and to sell them as slaves. And they made unto themselves molten images which they worshipped, each one the idol he had molten for himself, and the evil spirit under the leader Mestema led them astray into sin and uncleanliness. For this reason Rao called his son Sureg, because all mankind had turned aside into sin and transgression. And when he grew to manhood, the name was seen to have been chosen fittingly, for he too worshipped idols. And when he himself had a son, Nahor by name, he taught him the arts of the Chaldeans, how to be a soothsayer and practice magic according to the signs in the heavens. And when in time a son was born to Nahor, Mestma sent ravens and other birds to despoil the earth and to rob men of the proceeds of their work. As soon as they dropped the seed in the furrows, and they, before they could cover it with the earth, the birds picked it up from the surface of the ground. And Nahor called his son Terah, because the ravens and the other birds plagued men, devoured their seeds, and reduced them to destitution. This has been Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews, Volume 1, Chapter 5.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Abracast. I'm John Towers. This is the Abracast. Hey, it's time we get back to our look at Genesis. We really did a great job covering it. albeit we covered it pretty dodgily. If not anything else, we covered it slightly out of order or just straight up backwards in some points. But the last episode we did was way back in October of 2018 with Noah, Ham's curse, and the curse of Canaan, where I held back a little bit, but I started tying Canaan's curse into some sort of sexual deviation and linking it to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is really good stuff, and we're going to get to it really soon. But we can't just get to Sodom and Gomorrah. We have to first talk about this guy, Abram. At least that is his name at the start of the story. So this links into all of our Nimrod, Tower of Babel, World War Zero episodes, Adam's Magic Underpants episodes, all those great real older episodes nowadays. This is going to tie into all of that. World War Zero, especially. Abram has a starring role at the end of World War Zero. So you might want to hit up that featured topic link in the Genesis category at abracast.com to get a refresher on a lot of that stuff. The featured books for tonight are going to be just two, the Bible and Ginsberg's Legend of the Jews. So if you're playing at home, now is the time that I would like you to summon your vessel of the art. And I would like you to fill the vessel with your favorite weapon of mass distraction. Mine is, as usual, a Jinn Jihad. And I really need to come up with some more toasts, because I just keep falling back onto the Jaws toast. Here's to swimming with bow-legged women. Fuck it, man. I mean, it works. Why not use it? Okay, so let's get into this thing. Where were we? Oh, well, Ginsberg goes on to tell the story about how Abram was abandoned in this cave as a newborn infant. And God sends down the Archangel Gabriel to provide milk to the infant. And this baby, who is like 10 days old or something, gets up and he walks out of this cave and he starts like preaching and fucking yelling at the sky. This crazy baby. Legends of the Jews says, when the sun sank and the stars came forth, he said, "These are the gods." But then the dawn came and the stars could be seen no longer. And then he says, "I will not pay worship to these, for they are no gods." This a baby is saying this. Therefore the sun came forth and he spoke, "This is my God, him will I extol." But then the sun set and this baby says, "He is no God." And beholding the moon, he called her his God, with whom he would pay divine homage. And then the moon was obscured and he cried out, "This too is no God. There is one who sets them all in motion." And he was still communing with himself when the Archangel Gabriel approached him and met him with greetings, saying, "Peace be with thee." And Abraham returned, "With thee be peace," and asked, "Who art thou?" So I just need to stop. Ginsberg here is calling him Abraham, although I do not believe he's Abraham yet. So take it up with the Legend of the Jews guy. And Gabriel answered and said, "I am the angel Gabriel, the messenger of God." And he led Abraham to a spring of water nearby, and Abraham washed his face with his hands and feet. And he prayed to God, bowing down and prostrating himself. So In this story, Abraham is reunited with his mother and his family and grows pretty rich and powerful. And that's kind of where we found him in the World War Zero episode, where he gathers 318 of these like fucking ninja servants, and they go and they end the War of the Nine Kings. We've talked about at some length in those older episodes. This is where we meet the mysterious Melchizedek and so forth. So I would highly recommend those episodes if you guys missed them. And we are getting newer listeners like all the time. So if you're like, what is this guy talking about, this fucking Melchizedek? I'll tell you what, Melchizedek is a can of worms, bro. It's just a can of worms. All right. So back to Ginsberg. This is called the Covenant of the Pieces. Shortly after the war, God revealed himself unto Abraham to soothe his conscience as to the spilling of innocent blood. For it was a scruple that gave him much anguish of spirit. God assured him the same time that he would cause pious men to arise among his descendants who, like himself, would be shielded into their generations. As a further distinction, God gave him leave to ask what he would have, a rare grace accorded to none besides Jacob, Solomon, and the Messiah. Abraham spoke and said, O Lord of the world, in time to come to my descendants should provoke thy wrath. It were better I remain childless, Lot, for the sake of whom I journeyed as far as Damascus, where God was my protection, would be well pleased with my heir. Moreover, I have read in the stars, Abraham, thou wilt beget no children. Therefore, God raised Abraham above the vault of the sky and said, Thou art a prophet, not an astrologer. And now Abraham demanded no sign that he would be blessed with offspring. Without losing another word, he believed in the Lord, and he was rewarded for his simple faith by a share of this world. And to share in this world to come as well. And besides, the redemption of Israel from the exile will take place as recompense for his firm trust. We're going to jump over to Genesis 15, the Lord's covenant with Abraham. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. And the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. The legend of the Jews goes, But though he believed the promise made with him, a full and abiding faith, he yet desired to know by what merit of theirs his descendants would maintain themselves. Therefore, God bade him to bring a sacrifice of 3 heifers, 3 she-goats, 3 rams, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And indicating to Abram, Legend of the Jews calls him Abraham. The Bible is still calling him Abram at this time. indicating to Abraham the various sacrifices that should once be brought in the temple to atone for the sins of Israel and further his welfare. But what will become of my descendants? Asked Abraham, after the temple is destroyed. And God replied, saying, if they read the order of the sacrifices, and if they will be set down in the scriptures, I will account it to them as though they had offered the sacrifices, and I will forgive all of their sins. And God continued and revealed to Abraham the course of Israel's history and on the history of the whole world. And the heifer of 3 years indicates the dominion of Babylon. And the she-goat of 3 years stands for the empire of the Greeks. And the ram of 3 years, the Medo-Persian power. The rule of Ishmael is represented by the ram, and Israel is the innocent dove. So, back to the Bible. The Bible has a slightly different story. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abraham said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? And the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. And Abram brought all these things to him, cut him in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. The birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Back to Legend of the Jews. Abraham took these animals and divided them in the midst, and he had not done so, Israel would not have been able to resist the power of the 4 kingdoms. But in the birds he divided not, to indicate that Israel will remain whole. And the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. Thus was announced the advent of the Messiah, who will cut the heathen in pieces. But Abraham bade Messiah wait until the time appointed unto him. This messianic time was made known unto Abram, who also the time of the resurrection of the dead. And he lay the halves of the pieces over against each other. The animals became alive again, and the birds flew over them. Back to the Bible. As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep. And a thick and dreadful darkness came over him, and the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace. And be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, the smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kezanites, and Kadmonites. Legend of the Jews. while preparing these sacrifices, this is Ginsberg again. While preparing these sacrifices, a vision of great import was granted to Abraham. The sun sank, and a deep sleep fell on him. And he beheld the smoking furnace, Gehenna, and the furnace that God prepares for the sinner. And he beheld a flaming torch, the revelation on Sinai, where all the people saw flaming torches, and he beheld the sacrifices to be brought by Israel. And a horror of great darkness fell upon him, the domain of the four kingdoms. And God spake to him, Abraham, as long as thy children fulfill the two duties, the studying of the Torah and the performing of the service in the temple, the two visitations, Gehenna and alien rule, and will be spared them. But if the neglect of these two duties, they will have to suffer the two chastisements. Thou mayest choose whether they shall be punished by the means of Gehenna or by the means of the dominion of the stranger. And that day along, Abraham wavered until God called unto him. And God says, how long will thou halt between two opinions? Decide for one of the two, and let it be for the dominion of the stranger. And God made known to him the 400 years of bondage is Israel in Egypt, and reckoned from the birth of Isaac, for until Abraham himself was the promise given that he should go to his father in peace and feel not the arrogance of the stranger oppressor. And the same time it was made known to Abraham that his father Terah would have a share in the world to come, for he had done penance for his sinful deeds. And furthermore, it was revealed to him that his son Ishmael would turn into the path of a righteousness while yet his father was alive. And his grandson Esau would not be his impious way of life until he himself had passed away. And he received the promise of the deliverance together with the announcement of slavery of his seed in a land not theirs. So it was made known to him that God would judge the four kingdoms and destroy them. All right, we're going back to Genesis 16, Hagar and Ishmael. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. And so she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children, and go sleep with my slave, and perhaps I could build my family through her. And Abram agreed to what Sarai had said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife, and he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. So I wonder if this whole bit about Abram kind of making this deal that his people are going to wind up becoming enslaved. I never really thought about it until just this moment, but the Bible makes it a point to say that Hagar is an Egyptian slave of this Hebrew woman, you know. I think it's important, especially when we see how this particular bargain plays out. Where was I? Oh, when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. Put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. So I'm going to skip through some of this stuff here. We're actually going to do a whole thing about Isaac and Ishmael when I go into this in-depth story. So just put a little asterisk right here. Put a pin, as they would say in corporate America, put a pin in it. I'm not taking it off the table. Just put a pin in it, and we'll circle back around to it. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. And Ishmael was 86 years old when Hagar bore him. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. All right. Continuing on with Genesis chapter 17, the covenant of circumcision. I'm glad I'm able to get this in before the break so we can all think about it. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. And then I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. So I guess just at face value, you're looking at this and you're like, oh, circumcised guys get laid more. Yeah, boy. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me and my covenant with you, you will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abraham. Your name will be, God, no longer, I'm having a real hard time. My dyslexic brain is having a real hard time keeping track of this. So I apologize. I no longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. So I won't have any problems going forward. For I have made you a father of many nations, and I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and to your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, for you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. And this is my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. The covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision. Motherfucker. And it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you for generations to come. Every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born to your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring, whether born in your household or bought with your money, must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. So I mean, I've said a bunch of things about God in the course of this podcast. I've called him a lunatic. I've called him a narcissist. I've said some really despisable things about the God of the Bible, either testament, whatever. I don't give a fuck. But reading this is like, trying to wrap your head around this is, I don't know. Like, to me, it's crazy. So anyhow, this is it. God says, God's talking to Abraham. Well, God's talking to Abram, and he goes, okay, first of all, that's not your name anymore. Your name is Abraham. Second of all, I'm going to cut you this sweet deal, and you're going to have a bunch of descendants, and they're going to be like kings and shit. Also, I need you to slice the foreskin off your dick. And everyone you're in charge of, they need to slice the foreskin off their dick too. Now, my point of view, I'm a red-blooded American man born in the fucking 1970s. And when I look at an uncircumcised dick, I'm like, God, thank God I am circumcised, because that shit is weird. However, this is weird. This is weird, and it's like weirdly unnatural. Like, I don't, maybe I should do a little bit of research. I'm sure there's scholarly rabbinical papers on what this is all about, but I mean, you just read this. It's just this one collection of verses in the Old Testament. You're like, I don't know, man. I just don't know. All right. I'm trying to keep my editorializing to a minimum these days. And I'm sorry I've spun off into this cul-de-sac of, I don't know, discarded foreskin, but, it's just really, it's just bizarre. I'm going to establish whole nations and kingdoms to the people who cut their loose dick skin off. Like, it's so weird, man. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. So he's going to rename his wife as well. Her name will be Sarah, and I will bless her, and I will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be a mother of nations, and kings of people will come from her. And Abraham fell face down, and he laughed, and he said to himself, will my son be born to a man of 100 years old, and will Sarah bear a child of the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for the descendants after him, as long as he cuts his loose dick skin off. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you, and will surely bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase his numbers. And he will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. And when he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. And on that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household, or brought with his money, and every male in his household, and circumcised them as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised that very day, and every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. I mean, imagine that party, bros. But so this is a thing we kind of been tracking with these Genesis episodes. I kind of started noticing it like right out of the gate. But there's this thing where like the wrong sibling gets blessed, and it's going to keep continuing. I mean, it famously continues at least to Esau and Jacob, but so it's interesting. If any of you guys out there have any information on this, like Seth getting blessed instead of Cain because Abel's not there, you know, that's like number one. But it also continues further and further, like down the line. I think we've noticed it like maybe two or three times. And I really can't find anything about it. So, you know, if anybody you guys know, I know some very smart people listen to this podcast. So, and it's interesting because like my dude that I talked to about this stuff was like, no, I've never noticed that before. Anyhow, we got to do this real quick.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode.
Towards Mount Rainier, he saw 9 gleaming discs outlined against the snow, each one about the size of a C-54. Is it a function of false reporting? Is it a function of media incompetence or straight up misinformation? From my point of view, every, quote, flying saucer, unquote, story from this point on is at least a suspect for some sort of corruption. It has been over 2 years since the puzzling death of Captain Mantell. Mantell died mysteriously in the skies south of Fort Knox, but before his radio went silent, he sent a strange message to Goodman Air Force Base.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
The visit of the angels. On the 3rd day after his circumcision, when Abraham was suffering dire pain, not just Abraham, think every man in his little kingdom or whatever is suffering this dire pain. Productivity halted because of all this loose dick skin removal. God spoke to the angels, saying, "Go to, let us pay visit to the sick." And the archangels refused and said, "What is man, that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man, and thou visitest him, and thou desirest to betake thyself to a place of uncleanliness, a place of blood and filth?" And God replied to them, saying, "Thus do you speak as ye live. The Savior of this blood is sweeter to me than myrrh and incense. And if you do not desire to visit Abraham, I will go alone." The day whereon God visited him was exceedingly hot. For he had bored a hole in hell so that its heat might reach as far as the earth. And no wayfarer venture aboard the highways, and Abraham be left undisturbed in his pain. he gets a fucking raw deal, dude. But the absence of strangers caused Abraham great vexation, and he sent his servant Eliezer forth to keep a lookout for travelers. And the servants returned from his fruitless search. Abraham himself, in spite of his illness and the scorching heat, prepared to go forth to the highway and to see whether he would not succeed where failure had attended Eliezer, whom he did not wholly trust at any rate, bearing in mind the well-known saying, quote, "no truth among slaves," unquote. At this moment, God appeared to him surrounded by the angels. Quickly, Abraham attempted to raise from his seat, but God checked every demonstration of respect. And when Abraham protested that it was unbecoming to sit in the presence of the Lord, God said, "As thou livest, thy descendants at the age of 4 and 5 will sit in days to come in the schools and the synagogues while I reside therein." Meantime, Abraham beheld 3 men. They were 3 angels, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, and had assumed the form of human beings to fulfill his wish for guests towards whom they exercise hospitality. Each of them had been charged by God with a special mission, deciding to be executed on earth. Raphael was to heal the wound of Abraham. Michael was to bring Sarah the glad tidings that she would bear a son, and Gabriel was to deal destruction to Sodom and Gomorrah. Arrived at the tent of Abraham, the 3 angels noticed that he was occupied in nursing himself, and they withdrew. Abraham, however, hastened them to come through another door in the tent, which had a wide entrance on all sides, so they could fit their wings through, And he considered the duty of hospitality more important than the duty of receiving the Shekinah. Turning to God, he said, "O Lord, may it please thee not to leave thy servant while he provides for the entertainment for his guests." And then he addressed himself to the stranger walking in the middle between the 2 others, whom by this token he considered the most distinguished. It was the archangel Michael. And he bade him and his companions turn aside into his tent in the manner of his guests, who treated one another politely, made a good impression upon Abraham, and he assured that they were men of worth whom he was entertaining, but they appeared outwardly like Arabs, and the people worshipped the dust of their feet. He bade them to wash their feet so they might defile his tent. He did not depend upon his own judgment in reading the character of his guests. By his tent, a tree was planted, which spread its branches out over all who believed in God and afforded them shade. But if idolaters went under the tree, the branch turned upwards and cast no shade upon the ground. Whenever Abraham saw this sign, he would at once set about the task of converting the worshippers of the false gods. And the tree made a distinction between the pious and the impious, so also between the clean and the unclean. Its shade was denied them as long as they refrained from taking the prescribed ritual bath in the spring that flowed out from its roots, and the waters which rose at once for those uncleanliness was of a venial character, and could be removed forthwith, while the others who had wait 7 days for the water to come up. Accordingly, Abraham bade the 3 men lean against the trunk of the tree, Thus, he would soon learn their worth or their unworthiness. This is hilarious. This is really funny. Being of the truly pious, who promises little but performs much, Abraham said only. I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort ye in your heart, seeing that ye chanced to pass by my tent at dinner time. And then after ye have given thanks to God, ye may pass on. But when the meal was served to its guest, it was the royal banquet, exceeding Solomon's at the time of his most splendid magnificence. And Abraham himself ran into the herd to fetch cattle for the meat, and he slaughtered 3 calves that he might be able to set a tongue with mustard before each of his guests in order to accustom Ishmael to God-pleasing deeds. He had him dress the calves as he bade, and Sarah baked the bread, and he knew the women were apt to treat guests. I'm not going to say it. I know it doesn't mean the bad word, but I'm not going to, it's N-wordly. I'm not going to get caught in that trap. And he was explicit in his request to her. And he said, make ready quickly 3 measures of meal. Yeah, fine meal. As it happened, the bread was not brought to the table because it had accidentally become unclean, and our father Abraham was accustomed to eat his daily bread only in a clean state. Abraham himself served his guests, and it appeared to him that the 3 men ate, but it was an illusion. It was a perfect illusion. In the reality, the angels did not eat. Only Abraham and his 3 friends, Esner, Eshel, and Mamre, and his son Ishmael partook in the banquet, and the portions set before the angels were devoured by heavenly fire. Although the angels remained angels even in their human disguise, nevertheless, the personality of Abraham was so exalted in the presence of the archangels, felt insignificant. After the meal, the angels asked for Sarah, though they knew that she was in retirement in her tent, but it was proper for them to pay their respects to the lady of the house, and sent her the cup of wine over which the blessing had been said. Michael, the greatest of angels, thereupon announcement of the birth of Isaac. He drew a line upon a wall saying, when the sun crosses this point, Sarah will be with child, and when she crosses the next point, she will give birth to a child. So this is all astrotheology. Remember, we were talking at the very beginning of the Legends of the Jews. You know, Abram was some sort of astronomer because that's what his dad and his granddad did. And now we have Michael who's drawing lines on the wall, and he's like, when the sun hits this line, this is when you need to fuck her. And when it's on this line, that's when she's going to squeeze this baby out. This communication, which is intended for Sarah and not for Abraham, to whom the promise had been revealed long before, the angels made the entrance to the tent, but Ishmael stood between the angel and Sarah, for it would not have been seemly to deliver the message in secret, and with none other by. Yet so radiant was the beauty of Sarah that a beam of it struck the angel and made him look up. In the act of turning towards her, he heard her laugh within herself. And it is possible that these bowels can bring forth a child, these shriveled breasts give a suck, and although I should be able to bear, yet it not my Lord Abraham old. And the Lord said unto Abraham, so it seems like there's a couple different things going on here. It seems like Michael is, quote, in letting Sarah know that she's going to have a child, Quote. And the Lord is keeping Abraham busy. I am too old to do wonders, and wherefore doth Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child, which I am old, and the reproach made by God was directed against Abraham, as well as against Sarah, for he too had showed himself of little faith, when he was told that a son would be born unto him. But God mentioned that Sarah's incredulity, leaving Abraham to become conscious of his defect himself. And it's not a defect. The guy's like 90 something fucking years old. I'm touchy about something. Can you tell? Regretfully of the peace of the family life, God had not repeated Sarah's words accurately to Abraham. See, gossip, loose lips, even God's lips sink ships. Abraham must not have taken amiss when his wife had said about his advanced years, and so precious is the peace between the husband and the wife that even the Holy One, blessed be he, preserved it at the expense of truth. And after Abraham had entertained his guests, he went with them to bring them on their way, for important as the duty of hospitality is, the duty of speeding the parting guests is even more important. Their way lay in the direction of Sodom, whither two of the angels were going, the one to destroy it and the second to save Lot, where the third was his errand to Abram fulfilled, returned to heaven. So it's funny that this all comes up tonight. The reason that it's funny is because I've been put in a weird position where I have to find some tax information from 2003. And I got up early to look for it, so I'm looking for this tax information from, who saves shit? It's all been almost 20 years. So I bust open like I have an old briefcase that I bought when I was getting out of the army. So when you get out of the army, you have to go to like a bunch of like legal meetings and medical meetings and this and that and other. And so you could see when people are getting out because they start carrying around this briefcase. So I went and I bought a Samsonite briefcase, and I just jammed bullshit into it. Like I haven't probably even opened it since 2006, I don't think. But one of the things that I found when I was going through it, auditing myself for this missing tax stuff from 2003, is I found a letter from Heavy Metal Magazine that was a rejection letter, and it was partially handwritten, which I love. I love handwritten rejection letters. I submitted a comic story to Heavy Metal, and basically it was this. It was exactly what we talked about the last half of this episode. It was the meeting of these angels in Abraham, and it would go on to become like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't even know if I have these. They were like watercolors and pen and inks, and I thought that they were okay. I just gotten out of art school at the time. Fuck, man, whatever. But so it's funny because I didn't draw the link until I was reading this. I was like, oh yeah, I just saw their rejection letter. And like, what kind of lunatic keeps his rejection letters? I don't know. Me, I guess. I do it. My favorite one is the one where they're like, there is no way we're going to publish this book. It glorifies drugs. It glorifies psychosis. It glorifies all this violence and stuff. I'm like, come on, whatever. But anyhow, so I'm John Towers. This has been the Abercast. This month, when you sign into the mailing list for the Fulgore Correspondentia, I'm going to scan in a bunch of Gabriel and Archangel Gabriel artwork. She's appeared in a few of my books. So I'm just going to go ahead and scan in a bunch of artwork to make available for the folks that sign into the mailing list this month. Yep. And thanks to the Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. I mean, I think that the quality of the podcast, the difference of the quality of the podcast has been markedly uprising since I've been getting supporters. So, yeah. So thank you. And thank you for the support. And also want to give a shout out to my voice talent, Hilla Assor. Hilla has a new website. So if you're interested in the lady that intros all the stuff like this.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Yeah, do what she says and visit her website, which is in the show notes now. And with that being said, thank you guys very much. And I will see you. If I don't see you for Zarathustra on Wednesday, I will see you next week. So there you go.